The chainsaw felt wrong in Jake Sullivan's hands as he stared at the 200-foot fallen redwood blocking his inherited land in Northern California. As a construction foreman, he'd demolished countless structures, but something about this ancient giant made him hesitate. Then he noticed the door. Carved seamlessly into the trunk's base was an entrance that shouldn't exist. Inside, Jake found a fully furnished cabin with electricity, running water, and walls lined with his uncle's journals dating back 40 years. But it was the steel vault behind a false wall that changed everything. The contents defied explanation. Maps marking similar trees across the Pacific Northwest, photographs of his family dating back to the 1800s, and a leather-bound ledger documenting something called the Watchers. Each entry warned of the same thing: never let them find the trees. Jake's hands trembled as he read the final entry, written just days before his uncle's death. "They're coming. Jake must know the truth about what we've been protecting." But what ancient secret had his family died to protect? And why were black SUVs now circling his property? The morning fog clung to the redwood grove like smoke from a dying fire as Jake pressed his back against the cabin's interior wall. Through the cleverly disguised windows, mere slits from the outside, he watched 3 vehicles position themselves at different points around the fallen giant. Professional, coordinated, definitely not lost tourists. His uncle Marcus had always been the family eccentric, the hermit who disappeared into these Northern California woods 30 years ago after Jake's father died. Growing up, Jake had heard whispers about Marcus's research and obsessions, but the family had written him off as a grief-stricken man who'd lost his way. The inheritance notice 3 weeks ago had been Jake's first contact with his uncle in over a decade. Now, surrounded by evidence of a conspiracy that apparently stretched back generations, Jake realized how wrong they'd all been. The leather ledger lay open beside him, its yellowed pages filled with meticulous handwriting in different inks, different hands. His great-grandfather's careful script documented the First Awakening in 1923. His grandfather's hurried notes described something called the Purge of 58, where 7 family guardians had simply vanished. And Marcus's entries, growing increasingly paranoid over the years, tracked movements of unmarked vehicles and strange inquiries from government agencies that didn't seem to exist. Jake flipped to a page marked with a red ribbon. A photograph fell out. Black and white, taken sometime in the early 1900s. His great-great-grandmother stood beside another massive fallen redwood, her hand resting on what looked like ritual symbols carved into the bark. Behind her, partially visible in the tree's hollow, strange geometric shapes seemed to pulse with their own inner light. The same shapes he'd glimpsed deeper in this very trunk before the vault had distracted him. A radio crackled outside. Jake caught fragments through the cabin's walls, perimeter secured, no sign of entry. Check for the opening Garrett mentioned. Garrett! The name hit Jake like cold water. His uncle's lawyer, the man who'd handled the inheritance, who'd insisted Jake come out here personally to assess the property, the man who'd known exactly where to send him. Jake's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Your uncle chose poorly at the end. You still have a chance to choose wisely. Walk away now. He powered off the phone immediately, remembering his uncle's warnings about electronic surveillance scattered throughout the journals. Marcus had become increasingly careful about technology in his final years, reverting to handwritten notes and analog equipment. Paranoid, Jake had thought. Now it seemed prescient. The sound of footsteps on fallen leaves made him freeze. Someone was circling the tree, close enough that Jake could hear their breathing through the bark walls. His uncle's engineering was remarkable. The cabin remained completely hidden, its electrical and plumbing systems somehow integrated with the tree's natural root system. But if these people knew what to look for, a metallic tap echoed through the cabin, then another. They were testing the trunk, listening for hollow spaces. Jake's eyes fell on another journal entry. This one marked emergency protocols in red ink, his uncle's final contingency plans. 3 different escape routes from the cabin. locations of other guardian families, and a warning that chilled him: if they find one tree, they'll find them all. The network must be protected at all costs. Outside, the tapping stopped. Jake held his breath, counting seconds that felt like hours. Then came the sound he'd been dreading: power tools starting up. They'd found the door. He grabbed the ledger and the most critical documents from the vault, stuffing them into a waterproof bag his uncle had left ready. According to the emergency protocols, he had maybe 3 minutes before they breached the outer defenses. As the whine of cutting tools grew louder, Jake opened a concealed panel near the back of the cabin. His uncle's escape tunnel beckoned, a crawlway that led deeper into the hillside, toward secrets that apparently multiple generations of his family had died protecting. He took one last look at the remarkable sanctuary Marcus had built, then disappeared into the darkness below. The drive north from San Francisco stretched longer than Jake had anticipated, winding through increasingly dense forests as civilization fell away behind him. His GPS had lost signal 20 miles back, leaving him to navigate by the hand-drawn map the lawyer had provided, a crude sketch that seemed more like something from a treasure hunt than legal documentation. Jake downshifted his jeep as the dirt road narrowed, branches scraping against the windows. Uncle Silas had always been eccentric, but choosing to live this far from everything bordered on paranoia. They'd met exactly 3 times in Jake's 32 years. Brief encounters at family funerals where Silas would materialize like a ghost, exchange awkward pleasantries, then vanish before the reception ended. The trees grew impossibly tall here, ancient redwoods that had stood for centuries. Afternoon light filtered down through the canopy in cathedral beams, and Jake felt dwarfed by their immensity. According to the map, he should be close now. He rounded a bend and slammed the brakes. A massive redwood lay across his path, easily 15 feet in diameter. The fallen giant must have been ancient when it toppled, its bark weathered grey and soft with moss. Jake killed the engine and stepped out, breathing air so clean it almost hurt his city-adapted lungs. But something was wrong with this picture. The tree hadn't simply fallen. Someone had been working on it. Carved steps led up to what looked like a doorway cut directly into the trunk. Jake approached slowly, his footsteps muffled by decades of fallen needles. The door was solid oak, fitted seamlessly into the wood as if it had grown there. A brass nameplate read, "S. Sullivan," in elegant script. Jake tried the handle and found it unlocked. The interior took his breath away. Someone had carved an entire living space from the hollow trunk, complete with fitted furniture, built-in shelving, and oil lamps mounted on the curved walls. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, every surface smooth and polished, the wood glowing warm amber in the filtered light. It felt less like a cabin than a ship's cabin, efficient and purposeful, with everything in its designated place. Jake ran his fingers along the walls, marveling at the workmanship. How long had this taken? Who had done it? The lawyer had mentioned property, but Jake had expected a conventional house, not this hidden marvel carved from nature itself. A fieldstone fireplace dominated one end, its chimney somehow vented through the trunk above. Comfortable chairs faced the hearth, and Jake could picture Silas here on winter evenings reading by lamplight while storms raged outside. The thought stirred an unexpected emotion, regret for conversations they'd never had, questions he'd never asked. He explored methodically, opening cabinets that revealed simple dishes, basic supplies, and shelf after shelf of books. Silas had been well read, his collection spanning history, archaeology, and what appeared to be extensive research on local Native American tribes. Many volumes looked ancient themselves, leather-bound and hand-annotated in spidery script. In the bedroom area, Jake found personal effects that humanized his mysterious uncle. Reading glasses, a coffee mug with "World's Most Adequate" uncle printed on it, clothes that suggested a man who valued function over fashion. But it was what he discovered, behind a seemingly decorative wooden panel that changed everything. The panel slid aside at his touch, revealing a steel vault door that looked distinctly out of place in the organic interior. A combination lock gleamed under the lamplight, and attached to it was an envelope with Jake's name written in careful block letters. His hands trembled slightly as he tore it open. "Jake, if you're reading this, I'm dead and you own this place. Good. The family secret dies with me if you walk away now. But if you're half the man your father was, you won't be able to resist looking. The combination is your father's birthday. Day, month, year. What's inside will seem impossible. It isn't. Our family has been guardians for over 2 centuries, and now that burden falls to you. Trust no one with what you learn. They've been watching, waiting. Opening this vault will tell them the guardian has awakened. Be ready. Silas." Jake read the note 3 times before the words fully sank in. Guardian? Watching? It sounded like the paranoid rambling of an old man who'd lived alone too long. But the vault was real, substantial, clearly expensive. Whatever Silas had protected, he'd taken it seriously. Jake's father had died 10 years ago, taking whatever family secrets he might have known to the grave. Jake stared at the combination lock, knowing that once he opened it, there would be no going back to ignorant peace. Outside, a branch cracked in the forest, loud as a gunshot. Jake froze, listening, but heard only wind through the canopy high above. Still, the sound had shattered the cathedral quiet, leaving him with the uncomfortable sensation of being observed. He spun the combination dial with steady fingers, entering his father's birthday. The lock clicked open with a sound like fate sealing. The morning light filtered through the redwood canopy as Jake approached the fallen giant with fresh eyes and a crowbar he'd found in the cabin's tool shed. Sleep had eluded him most of the night, his mind churning over the implications of what he'd discovered. The vault door seemed to mock him, its brass surface gleaming despite decades of neglect. He'd spent hours examining the mechanism, running his fingers along every groove and depression. The 8 circular indentations were clearly meant for something, but what? Uncle Ezra had been cryptic about everything else. Why would the key be different? Jake circled the massive trunk again, this time looking for anything he might have missed. The morning revealed details that shadows had hidden the day before. About 20 feet from the vault, carved into the bark with the same careful precision as the door itself, he found them. 8 small symbols arranged in a perfect octagon. They were weathered but distinct: a tree, a star, a wave, a flame, a mountain, a bird, a spiral, and something that looked like an eye. His pulse quickened. These had to be connected to the vault somehow. He memorized their positions, then hurried back inside the cabin to search for anything that might correspond to the symbols. The cabin revealed more secrets in daylight. Behind a loose floorboard near the fireplace, Jake discovered a leather-wrapped bundle. Inside were 8 medallions, each bearing one of the symbols he'd just seen carved into the tree. They were made of different materials. The tree medallion was carved from dark wood, the star from silver, the wave from what looked like polished shell. Each was roughly the size of a silver dollar and worn smooth by countless hands. Jake's heart hammered as he carried the medallions back to the vault. The first one, the tree medallion, slid perfectly into the topmost indentation. A soft click echoed from within the mechanism. The star medallion fit into the next position clockwise, followed by another click. One by one, Jake placed each medallion according to the pattern he'd memorized from the tree's surface. When the 8th medallion clicked into place, the entire vault door shuddered. Ancient gears groaned to life somewhere deep within the redwood's heartwood. Slowly, impossibly, the massive door swung inward on silent hinges. The space beyond was larger than Jake had imagined, carved directly into the redwood's core. Emergency lighting flickered to life. Somehow, incredibly, the electrical systems still functioned. The vault stretched back nearly 15 feet, its walls lined with metal filing cabinets and shelves holding artifacts that made Jake's breath catch. Maps covered one wall, some hand-drawn on what looked like animal hide, others printed on paper so old it had turned brown at the edges. Red pins marked locations across the globe: California, Peru, Easter Island, Cambodia, Egypt. Lines connected the pins in a complex web that seemed to follow no geographical logic Jake could discern. But it was the central display case that drew his attention. Under glass sat a collection of objects that belonged in a museum, stone tablets covered in symbols that predated any written language he recognized, metal artifacts that seemed to shift and shimmer in the artificial light, and photographs, hundreds of them, dating back to the early 1900s. The photos showed people, always in groups of 8, standing before various landmarks around the world. In many of the older photographs, Jake could make out the distinctive Sullivan jawline. His family had been documenting something for over a century. A thick journal bound in cracked leather sat open beside the display case. Jake lifted it carefully, noting his uncle's spidery handwriting on the visible page. The convergence accelerates. The signs are unmistakable now. Jake must be prepared, whether he wants this burden or not. The other families grow desperate, and desperate people make dangerous choices. Other families. Jake flipped back through the journal, finding references to surnames he didn't recognize. Blackwood, Chen, Rousseau, Volkov, all apparently connected to whatever his family had been guarding. Maps in the journal showed the same global network of locations, but with additional notations in different handwriting styles, a collaboration spanning continents. Near the back of the vault, Jake found something that made his blood run cold. A newspaper clipping from 2 months ago, the headline reading, "Archaeological Team Vanishes in Cambodia." The article was brief. 5 researchers had disappeared while investigating pre-Angkor ruins. Their equipment was found intact, but there was no sign of the team themselves. Uncle Ezra had circled the article in red ink and written in the margin, "Too close." They knew too much. Jake's hands trembled as he continued reading through the journal. References to guardians and the sleepers filled page after page, warnings about what would happen if certain sites were disturbed. And throughout it all, the recurring theme that his family, the Sullivans, held a crucial piece of something much larger. A sound from outside the vault made Jake freeze. Footsteps, careful and deliberate, crunching through the forest debris. Someone was approaching the fallen redwood, and instinct told him it wasn't a casual hiker. He grabbed the journal and quietly began removing the medallions from the vault door, his movements urgent but precise. Whatever was in this vault, Uncle Ezra had died protecting it, and now that responsibility had fallen to Jake. The drive back to his apartment felt surreal, like emerging from a dream into harsh fluorescent reality. Jake kept glancing at his rearview mirror, half expecting to see the towering redwood forest materialize behind him, proof that what he'd experienced wasn't some elaborate hallucination brought on by grief and too much coffee. His phone buzzed against the passenger seat. Sarah's name flashed on the screen. "Hey, how'd it go with the lawyer?" Her voice carried that careful tone people used when discussing dead relatives. "Complicated." Jake pulled into his apartment complex, noting how cramped everything seemed after the vastness of the forest. "Uncle Marcus left me some property up north." "Property?" I thought he was broke. So did I. Jake climbed the stairs to his second-floor unit, keys jingling. Turns out he owned 40 acres of redwood forest. Redwood forest? Jake, that could be worth millions. You know what land goes for in California? He did know, which made the whole situation even more bewildering. Inside his apartment, Jake tossed his keys onto the kitchen counter and stared at the stack of bills he'd been avoiding. If Sarah was right about the land value, his financial problems could disappear overnight. But something about Hartwell's demeanor suggested it wouldn't be that simple. "I'm going up there tomorrow to see it," he said. "Want company? I could take a personal day." The offer tempted him, but something held him back. "I should probably handle this alone first. Family stuff, you know." After hanging up, Jake pulled out the manila envelope Hartwell had given him. Inside, he found a hand-drawn map, a set of keys that looked older than his grandfather, and a letter written in his uncle's distinctive scrawl. "Jake, if you're reading this, then the inevitable has happened, and I've finally joined the rest of the family in whatever comes next. I know we never had the chance to really know each other, And that's my fault. Your father and I had our differences, but those were never about you. The property I'm leaving you isn't just land. It's a responsibility that's been in our family for 4 generations. Inside the cabin, you'll find things that will change how you see the world and our place in it. Trust no one completely, but remember that some secrets are worth protecting. Look for the heart of the fallen giant. When you find it, remember, some doors can't be closed once they're opened. Marcus. Jake read the letter 3 times, each pass raising more questions than answers. What responsibility? What secrets? And what the hell was the heart of the fallen giant? Sleep came fitfully that night, filled with dreams of towering trees and whispered conversations he couldn't quite understand. He woke before dawn with an urgency he couldn't explain, as if something was pulling him north toward the property. The drive took him through familiar Bay Area sprawl before the landscape began to change, hills giving way to deeper forests as he followed Highway 101 north. According to the map, he needed to exit near a town called Millhaven and follow a series of increasingly rural roads until he reached what his uncle had marked simply as the beginning. 3 hours later, Jake found himself on a narrow dirt road that barely deserved the name, his sedan protesting every rut and stone. Ancient redwoods rose on both sides like cathedral pillars, their canopies so thick that midday felt like twilight. The road ended at a rusted gate hanging open on its hinges. Beyond it, a footpath disappeared into the forest. Jake grabbed his backpack and started walking. The silence was absolute except for his footsteps on the carpet of fallen needles. No birds, no insects, no wind, just the overwhelming presence of trees that had stood for centuries before his great-great-grandfather was born. The path wound between massive trunks, some so wide that Jake couldn't see around them. Then he saw it. Ahead, the path ended at what looked like a natural wall of reddish bark, stretching impossibly wide in both directions. As he got closer, Jake realized he was looking at a single fallen redwood, a giant that must have stood 300 feet tall before it toppled. The trunk was so massive that it created its own landscape feature, like a wooden mountain range blocking the way forward. But there was a way forward. Someone had carved an opening in the bark, fitted with a heavy wooden door that looked both rustic and carefully crafted. Brass hinges gleamed despite their obvious age, and a complex lock mechanism waited for the right key. The heart of the fallen giant. Jake's hands shook slightly as he fitted the largest key from his uncle's collection into the lock. It turned with surprising smoothness, and the door swung open on well-oiled hinges. Inside was darkness, but not emptiness. The beam of his phone's flashlight revealed carved walls, electric lighting, and what appeared to be a fully functional living space hollowed out from the heart of the massive tree. His uncle hadn't just owned property in the redwoods. He'd lived inside one. The morning light filtered through the redwood's natural windows as Jake sat at the carved table, the leather journal open before him. His coffee had gone cold hours ago, but he couldn't tear himself away from his great-grandfather's meticulous handwriting. Each page revealed another layer of a conspiracy that stretched back centuries, and with each revelation the weight of responsibility pressed heavier on his shoulders. According to Ezra Sullivan's entries, the artifact hidden somewhere within the tree wasn't just valuable, it was dangerous. References to the convergence appeared repeatedly, along with cryptic mentions of bloodlines and guardians scattered across the continent. Most disturbing were the entries from 1962, describing men in dark suits asking questions about the family's collection, and Uncle Henry's sudden departure from town for 3 months. Jake was so absorbed in reading that the soft knock on the hidden door nearly sent him diving under the table. He froze, heart hammering. Nobody knew about this place. Nobody should be able to find the concealed entrance. The knock came again, followed by a woman's voice. "Jake Sullivan?" "My name is Dr. Elena Vasquez. I knew your uncle. We need to talk." Jake closed the journal and moved to the small window, angling for a view of his visitor. A woman in her early 40s stood near the tree's base, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore hiking boots and carried a weathered backpack, but something about her posture suggested she was more than just another academic researcher. "How did you find this place?" Jake called through the wood. "Henry showed me the entrance 2 years ago. He said if anything happened to him, I should come here and find his nephew. Said you'd need help understanding what you'd inherited." Jake hesitated. Uncle Henry had been secretive about everything, but this woman's knowledge of the hidden door suggested she was telling the truth. Against his better judgment, he triggered the release mechanism and stepped back as the door swung inward. Dr. Vasquez entered with practiced ease, her eyes immediately scanning the carved interior with appreciation. "Incredible workmanship," she murmured, then focused on Jake. "You found the vault, I assume?" "Yesterday, along with enough questions to drive me insane." Jake gestured to the journal. "What exactly was my uncle involved in, Dr. Vasquez?" "Elena, please." And Henry was part of something much larger than himself. Much larger than any of us, really. She shrugged off her backpack and pulled out a tablet computer. "I'm an archaeologist specializing in pre-Columbian artifacts, but my real work involves tracking items that certain people would prefer remained lost." "Certain people?" Elena's expression darkened. "The Cygnus Foundation. On the surface, they're a legitimate research organization funded by tech billionaires and old European money. Underneath, they're systematically acquiring artifacts that don't fit conventional historical narratives, items that suggest human civilization is far older and more advanced than we've been taught." Jake felt the familiar chill of puzzle pieces clicking into place. The convergence. It's mentioned repeatedly in here. So Henry did leave records. Elena moved closer to examine the journal. "The convergence refers to a global network of families tasked with protecting specific artifacts. Your family has been guardians for over 200 years, Jake. The item hidden in this tree is one of 13 pieces that, if brought together, could rewrite everything we think we know about human history. And the Cygnus Foundation wants to collect all 13 pieces? They already have 7. Henry's death wasn't accidental. They've been systematically eliminating guardians who refuse to cooperate." Elena pulled up a file on her tablet showing newspaper clippings and obituaries. Car accidents, hiking mishaps, sudden heart attacks. All guardians, all within the past 18 months. Jake's mouth went dry as he scanned the headlines. "You're saying they murdered my uncle?" "I'm saying Henry called me 3 days before his death, terrified that they'd found him. He was planning to move the artifact to a new location, but he ran out of time." Elena met Jake's eyes. "Now they know about you. The fact that you inherited this place makes you the new guardian, whether you want the job or not. This is insane. I'm a software engineer from Portland. I don't know anything about ancient artifacts or secret conspiracies. Neither did Henry when he inherited from your great-grandfather. But the bloodline chooses the guardian, not the other way around." Elena began packing her tablet away. "You have maybe 48 hours before they track you here. We need to find whatever Henry hid and move it to safety." Jake looked around the carved interior that had already begun to feel like home. "Where exactly do you hide a priceless artifact inside a tree that's already been completely hollowed out?" Elena smiled grimly. "That's what we're going to find out. But first, you need to understand that once we take that step, there's no going back. The moment you claim your inheritance as guardian, you become a target for life." The weight of generations pressed down on Jake's shoulders as he stared at his great-grandfather's journal. His quiet life in Portland suddenly seemed very far away. The silence that followed Marcus's words felt heavier than the redwood walls surrounding them. Jake stared at the photographs spread across the table, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. Ancient stone structures, carved symbols that seemed to pulse with meaning, and faces, so many faces of people who looked disturbingly familiar. "My great-grandfather," Marcus said, pointing to a sepia-toned photograph of a stern-faced man standing before what appeared to be a massive stone archway. "Thomas Sullivan. He was part of the expedition that found the first site in 1923. Jake picked up the photograph with trembling fingers. The man in the image shared his jawline, his eyes. First sight? There are 7 in total, scattered across the globe, all connected by ley lines that ancient civilizations somehow understood better than we do. Marcus moved to another photograph. This one's in Peru. Your Uncle Henry spent 3 years there in the 70s documenting the symbols before the government declared the area off-limits. The pieces were clicking into place with nauseating clarity. Jake's childhood memories of Uncle Henry's unexplained absences, the postcards from exotic locations with cryptic messages, the way conversations stopped when he entered the room during family gatherings. What exactly are these sites? Jake asked, though part of him dreaded the answer. Marcus hesitated, then reached for a leather-bound journal from the bottom of the pile. According to our research, and we've had nearly a century to study this, there's some kind of ancient technology, not built by any civilization we know of. The symbols aren't just decorative, they're instructions. Instructions for what? That's where it gets complicated. Marcus opened the journal, revealing pages of meticulous notes in Henry's familiar handwriting. The sites seemed to be connected to geological events. Every major earthquake, volcanic eruption, or tsunami in recorded history can be traced back to unusual electromagnetic activity at one of these locations. Jake felt the blood drain from his face. You're saying these things control natural disasters? Not control, more like regulate. Think of them as pressure valves for the planet's tectonic stress. Ancient civilizations somehow built a global network designed to prevent catastrophic events by releasing energy gradually. Marcus's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. But if someone figured out how to manipulate them, the implication hit Jake like a physical blow. The power to trigger earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanic eruptions, it would be the ultimate weapon. No wonder people were willing to kill for it. The Order of the Crimson Dawn, Marcus continued, has been trying to gain access to these sites for decades. They believe they can harness the power for their own purposes. Your family, along with 6 others, have been the guardians, keeping the locations secret and the sites protected. Jake thought of the man in the expensive suit, his cold smile and casual threats. They found me pretty easily. Because Henry's dead, and the protective barriers he maintained are failing. Marcus closed the journal and looked directly at Jake. Each guardian family is responsible for one site. Without Henry, the California site is vulnerable. If they gain access to it, the San Andreas Fault, Jake breathed, understanding flooding through him. The entire West Coast would be at risk. Millions of lives. Marcus stood and walked to a small window carved into the redwood wall. Henry knew they were getting close. That's why he prepared this place, why he left everything to you instead of your father. Jake's head snapped up. What about my father? Marcus's shoulders sagged. David chose a different path. He wanted to expose everything, go public with the knowledge. Henry tried to explain that the world wasn't ready, that revealing the sites would only make them more vulnerable to exploitation, but David wouldn't listen. The family rift suddenly made sense. Jake remembered the bitter arguments, the long silences between his father and uncle, the way Henry's name became taboo in their household. Where is the California site? Jake asked, though he suspected he already knew. 2 miles north of here. Hidden in a grove that's been protected by legal maneuvers and shell companies for generations. Henry built this cabin as both a monitoring station and a last line of defense. Marcus turned back to face him. The vault you opened wasn't just storage, Jake. It was a lock. Henry's death triggered a countdown, and opening it started the process. What process? In 72 hours, if the site isn't properly secured by a blood relative of the Guardian family, all the protective protocols will shut down permanently. The Order will be able to walk right in and take control. Jake felt the weight of generations pressing down on him. He thought of his quiet life in Portland, his apartment with the leaky faucet, his job at the insurance company. 3 days ago, his biggest worry had been making rent. I don't know how to do any of this, he said quietly. Henry left instructions. Everything you need is here. Marcus gestured to the documents scattered around them. But Jake, once you commit to this path, there's no going back. The Order will never stop hunting you. Through the window, Jake could see the massive redwoods swaying in the evening breeze, their ancient forms silhouetted against the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, forces beyond his comprehension waited in the shadows. The choice was his to make. The morning fog clung to the redwoods like ghostly fingers as Jake made his way back to the fallen giant. Sleep had been elusive, his mind churning over the contents of the vault and the cryptic warnings in his uncle's journal. The metal box felt heavy in his backpack, not just from its physical weight, but from the burden of secrets it carried. He'd spent half the night researching the symbols online, finding scattered references to ancient protective orders and something called the Verdant Circle, a group that supposedly safeguarded natural sites of power. Most sources dismissed it as folklore, but the evidence in his hand suggested otherwise. The carved entrance to the cabin appeared ahead, its perfectly smoothed edges a testament to his uncle's craftsmanship. Jake paused, scanning the surrounding forest. Something felt different. The usual chorus of birds was muted, and the air carried an tension that made his skin prickle. Inside the hollow trunk, everything appeared exactly as he'd left it. The vault door hung open, its contents now residing in his backpack. But as Jake moved toward the living area, he noticed something that stopped him cold, a single muddy footprint on the floor that wasn't his own. His pulse quickened. Someone had been here. Jake pulled out his phone, but the bars showed no signal this deep in the woods. He was alone. Moving carefully, he examined the footprint more closely. It was large, from a hiking boot with a distinctive tread pattern. Fresh dirt suggested the intruder had been here recently, possibly even this morning. A soft creak from above made him freeze. In the carved ceiling, his uncle had installed a small loft accessible by a ladder. Jake had barely glanced at it during his previous visits, assuming it was just storage space. Now, staring up at the opening, he realized someone could be hiding there. Grabbing a flashlight from the kitchen area, Jake climbed the ladder slowly, each rung groaning under his weight. The loft was cramped, forcing him to crawl on hands and knees. His flashlight beam revealed stacks of boxes and old furniture, but in the far corner, something caught his attention, a section of the wood that looked different, newer. As he crawled closer, Jake discovered another hidden panel. Unlike the sophisticated vault below, this one opened with a simple wooden latch. Inside was a collection of photographs, some dating back decades. The images showed groups of people in various locations, always near massive trees, always holding objects similar to what he'd found in the vault. One photograph made his breath catch. It showed his uncle as a young man, standing beside a woman Jake didn't recognize. They were positioned in front of what appeared to be the same fallen redwood, but the tree looked freshly fallen, its trunk not yet hollowed out. Written on the back in faded ink, "Margaret and I begin the watch, 1987. More photographs revealed a pattern. Different people, different decades, but always the same solemn poses near ancient trees. Jake realized he was looking at generations of guardians, each taking up the responsibility his uncle had described. The weight of that legacy settled on his shoulders like a physical force. A sound from below, the soft thud of the cabin door closing, sent ice through his veins. Jake switched off the flashlight and crawled toward the loft opening, listening intently. Footsteps moved through the main room, deliberate and searching. "I know you're in here, Sullivan." The voice was gravelly, unfamiliar. "Make this easy on both of us. Hand over what you took from the vault and nobody gets hurt." Jake's mind raced. How did this person know about the vault? How long had they been watching? Through the loft opening, he caught glimpses of a large man in dark clothing moving through the cabin, opening drawers and cabinets. "Your uncle was smart to hide, but he got careless in his old age," the intruder continued. "Took us years to track this place down. Amazing what people will do for money, though. That grocery store clerk was very helpful once we explained the situation." Jake remembered mentioning the cabin to Betty at the store, asking for directions. His uncle's careful isolation had been compromised by Jake's own carelessness. The man was directly below now, examining the open vault. Empty, just like we thought. "You've got everything, don't you? The artifacts, the maps, probably found the old man's journal too." Jake slowly reached into his backpack, feeling for anything he could use as a weapon. His fingers closed around one of the carved wooden objects from the vault, smooth and surprisingly heavy. "Here's what's going to happen," the voice continued. "You're going to come down from wherever you're hiding, and we're going to have a conversation about your family's little hobby. There are people who've been looking for those items for a very long time, and they're not the patient type." The footsteps paused directly beneath the loft ladder. Jake held his breath, knowing that discovery was inevitable. Whatever his uncle had been protecting, whatever ancient secret the family had guarded, the time for hiding was over. The GPS on Jake's phone showed nothing but blank green space where they were headed, but Marcus seemed to know every twist in the unmarked forest road. The SUV's headlights carved through the pre-dawn darkness, illuminating towering redwoods that stood like ancient sentinels on either side of the narrow path. "How much farther?" Jake asked, gripping the door handle as they took another sharp turn. 5 minutes, Marcus replied, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Dr. Chen's compound is completely off-grid. She's been studying the phenomena for 30 years, ever since she witnessed what happened to her research team in Tibet." Sarah leaned forward from the back seat. "What exactly happened to them?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "They found something they shouldn't have. Only Chen survived to tell about it." The road ended at a metal gate flanked by motion sensors and cameras. Marcus rolled down his window and pressed his palm to a scanner. After a moment that felt like an eternity, the gate swung open with a mechanical hum. The compound beyond looked like something between a research facility and a fortress. Solar panels gleamed on the roofs of several low buildings, and Jake could see the distinctive dome of an observatory rising above the tree line. Security lights illuminated a central courtyard where a small woman in her 60s waited for them. Dr. Mei Chen wore cargo pants and a practical jacket, but her eyes held the intensity of someone who had seen beyond the veil of ordinary reality. She embraced Marcus briefly before turning her attention to Jake. "You have your uncle's eyes," she said, studying his face, "and I suspect you've inherited more than just his property." "That's what we're hoping you can help us figure out," Jake replied, pulling the metal cylinder from his backpack. "This was in his vault, along with some documents that suggest my family has been guarding something for generations." Chen's expression grew grave as she examined the artifact. "Come inside. There are things you need to understand before we go any further." She led them into the main building, past banks of humming computers and walls lined with charts showing astronomical data. The air smelled of ozone and brewing coffee. In the center of the room stood a table covered with artifacts that made Jake's skin crawl just looking at them. Twisted metal fragments, crystalline structures that seemed to bend light around them, and photographs of sites that looked like they'd been subjected to forces beyond human comprehension. 37 years ago, Chen began, pouring coffee from a thermal carafe. "I was part of an archaeological expedition in the Himalayas. We were investigating reports of unusual electromagnetic readings near an ancient monastery. What we found changed everything I thought I knew about human history." She moved to a wall map dotted with red pins. "These mark locations where similar phenomena have been recorded throughout history. Stone circles, temple complexes, burial sites, all of them built on what the ancients called thin places, where the barriers between worlds grow weak." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Barriers between what worlds? "That's the question your family has been trying to answer for over 2 centuries, Chen replied. "The Sullivans have been guardians, Jake, protectors of knowledge that could reshape human understanding of reality itself." She gestured to a computer screen showing a 3-dimensional model of what looked like interconnected energy fields. "The artifact you're carrying is a key, but not to any physical lock. It's designed to interact with naturally occurring dimensional weak points. places where the fabric of space-time is naturally thin. Sarah moved closer to examine the screen. You're talking about parallel dimensions? Other realities? I'm talking about layers of existence that exist alongside our own, Chen corrected. The monastery my team discovered had been built around one such convergence point. The monks who lived there weren't just meditating, they were standing guard. When we activated the chamber beneath the monastery, we opened a door that should have remained closed. Marcus set down his coffee cup with shaking hands. What came through? Chen's eyes grew distant. Something that shouldn't exist in our reality. Something hungry. My team, they were changed by contact with it. Their minds couldn't process what they were experiencing. 3 of them died within hours. The others... She shuddered. They're still alive, if you can call it that. Kept in a secure facility where they spend their days drawing symbols and speaking in languages that don't exist. Jake stared at the cylinder in his hands, suddenly understanding why his uncle had lived in isolation. And this thing I'm carrying, it could open another door? Not just any door, Chen said grimly. According to the research your uncle shared with me, the California redwood forests sit on one of the most powerful convergence points on Earth. The fallen tree where he built his cabin wasn't chosen randomly. It was grown and guided to fall in precisely that location by generations of your ancestors. A soft chime echoed through the building, and Chen's expression shifted to alarm. Someone's at the perimeter, she said, moving quickly to a bank of security monitors. 3 vehicles, approaching fast. On the screens, Jake could see black SUVs racing up the forest road, their headlights cutting through the darkness like angry eyes. They found us, Marcus said, his voice hollow with dread. Chen was already moving, grabbing equipment and shoving it into a backpack. There's another way out through the observatory. Move now! The morning mist clung to the redwoods like ghostly fingers as Jake crept through the undergrowth, his breath forming small clouds in the crisp air. He'd been moving since before dawn, following Marcus through terrain that seemed to shift between familiar and alien with each step. The events at the cabin 3 days ago had shattered any illusion of safety he might have harbored. Marcus stopped ahead, raising his fist in a silent signal. Jake froze, straining his ears above the sound of his own heartbeat. Somewhere in the distance, voices drifted through the trees, too far to make out words, but close enough to send ice through his veins. "How many?" Jake whispered, barely breathing the words. Marcus held up 3 fingers, then pointed northeast. The older man's face was grim, etched with lines that seemed to have deepened since they'd fled the burning remains of Jake's inheritance. The vault's contents were now distributed between their backpacks, wrapped in waterproof pouches that felt heavier than their actual weight suggested. They'd spent the last 2 nights sleeping in shifts, moving constantly through the dense forest. Marcus had led them along paths that weren't on any map, trails that seemed to exist in the spaces between civilization. Jake's legs ached, his shoulders burned from the pack's weight, but fear kept him moving. "The petroglyphs," Marcus had explained during their first night on the run, "they're not just markings, they're coordinates. Your uncle figured that out before they killed him." Jake still struggled to process that his uncle's death hadn't been the accident everyone believed. The man he'd barely known had died protecting something that stretched back centuries, and now that burden had fallen to him like an unwelcome inheritance. The voices grew closer. Marcus gestured toward a cluster of fallen trees, their massive trunks creating a natural maze of hiding spots. They moved carefully, placing each step with deliberate precision. Jake had learned quickly that one snapped twig could mean the difference between escape and capture. As they settled into the hollow beneath a moss-covered log, Jake caught his first clear glimpse of their pursuers through a gap in the deadfall. 3 figures in tactical gear moved with military precision, scanning the forest with an intensity that made Jake's skin crawl. The lead figure spoke into a radio, his words finally clear enough to understand. No sign of them at the secondary site. "They're moving deeper into the preserve. Copy that. Alpha team is sweeping from the north access road. We'll box them in." Jake's blood turned to ice water. They weren't just being followed, they were being hunted by multiple teams. Marcus's hand clamped down on his shoulder, a warning to remain still. The tactical team passed within 20 feet of their hiding spot, close enough that Jake could see the logo on their equipment. The same symbol he'd found in his uncle's papers, a stylized tree surrounded by what looked like ancient script. After the footsteps faded, Marcus pulled out a hand-drawn map, pointing to a location deeper in the forest. "There's an old ranger station about 3 miles from here. Abandoned since the 80s, but it has what we need." "What we need for what?" Jake's whisper was tight with exhaustion and fear. "To decode the rest of your uncle's research. Those petroglyphs aren't just coordinates, they're instructions. There's something hidden in these woods that people have died to protect for over 200 years. They emerged from their hiding spot and continued deeper into the wilderness. The trees here were ancient beyond imagination, their canopies so thick that the forest floor existed in perpetual twilight." Jake found himself thinking about his uncle's journals, filled with sketches and notes that had seemed like the work of an eccentric old man. Now they read like a survival manual. The abandoned ranger station appeared through the trees like a ghost from another era. Weathered wood and broken windows spoke of decades of neglect, but the structure looked solid. More importantly, it was hidden from any main trails and offered multiple escape routes. Inside, dust motes danced in shafts of sunlight streaming through gaps in the roof. Marcus immediately began setting up equipment he'd salvaged from the cabin, a laptop, some kind of scanning device, and several books wrapped in protective cloth. Jake watched as the older man transformed the decrepit space into a makeshift research center. "Your great-great-grandfather wasn't just a logger," Marcus said as he worked. "He was part of a group tasked with protecting something the local tribes considered sacred. When the government tried to seize it during the gold rush, these men hid it where no one would think to look." Jake pulled out one of the petroglyph rubbings, studying the intricate symbols that had consumed his uncle's final years. "And you think we can find it?" Marcus looked up from his equipment, his eyes reflecting both determination and fear. "I think we'd better, because whoever's hunting us won't stop until either we're dead or they have what we're protecting. And judging by what happened to your uncle, they're not particularly interested in taking prisoners." Outside, the forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting. The satellite phone's shrill ring cut through the morning silence like a blade. Jake jolted awake on the narrow bunk, his hand instinctively reaching for the Glock before his mind fully processed the sound. 3 rings, 4. Elena stirred beside him, her dark eyes snapping open with the practiced alertness of someone who'd learned to sleep light. "Answer it," she whispered, checking her own weapon. Jake grabbed the phone on the 6th ring. "Yeah, Mr. Sullivan." The voice was cultured, calm, and completely unfamiliar. "I trust you slept well in your little treehouse." Ice flooded Jake's veins. He motioned frantically to Elena, who was already moving toward the window. "Who is this?" "Someone who appreciates the elegance of your uncle's craftsmanship. Quite remarkable, really. A sanctuary carved from the bones of giants." The man paused, and Jake could hear wind in the background. But every sanctuary becomes a tomb when the exits are sealed. Elena peered through the periscope system, her face going pale. She held up 5 fingers, then 10, then made a circular motion. Jake's stomach dropped. They were surrounded. "What do you want?" Jake kept his voice steady, buying time while Elena gathered their gear. "The same thing every reasonable person wants, Mr. Sullivan, to prevent unnecessary suffering. Your uncle was a stubborn man who chose the hard path. I'm offering you an easier one. By easier, you mean dead." A soft chuckle. "Death is merely one option on the menu. I prefer to think of myself as a problem solver, and you, my friend, have become quite the problem." Elena pressed a hastily scrawled note against Jake's chest. "Emergency tunnel, behind water tank, go now." "Here's my counteroffer," Jake said into the phone. "You and your friends pack up and leave, and I won't share what I found in that vault with every news outlet from here to Washington." "Ah, the vault. Yes, We were rather hoping you'd mention that." The man's tone remained infuriatingly pleasant. "Tell me, Mr. Sullivan, what exactly do you think you discovered?" Jake's mind raced. How much do they actually know? "Why don't you come inside and we'll discuss it over coffee?" "I'm afraid that won't be necessary. You see, we've been monitoring your communications. Very interesting conversation you had with Dr. Chen yesterday. Archaeological surveys, carbon dating, DNA analysis, quite the ambitious research agenda." Elena had already vanished behind the water tank. Jake could hear the faint scraping of a concealed panel being opened. His pulse hammered as he realized these people had been listening to everything. "The problem with amateur archaeologists," the voice continued, "is they often misinterpret their findings. That collection of artifacts you're so excited about? Ancient religious items, nothing more. Ceremonial masks, primitive tools. The sort of things museums acquire every day without fanfare. Then why kill for them?" "Who said anything about killing? Though I admit, accidents do happen in these remote locations. Propane leaks, for instance. Such a tragedy when they ignite." Through the periscope, Jake caught a glimpse of movement in the tree line. Men in tactical gear were setting up equipment. His blood chilled as he recognized the distinctive yellow tanks they were positioning around the redwood's base. "You're insane," Jake breathed. "I'm practical. Fire cleanses everything, Mr. Sullivan. Evidence, witnesses, inconvenient family legacies. In a few hours, this will all be chalked up to a camping accident. Unfortunate city boy, unfamiliar with wilderness safety protocols." Elena's urgent whisper echoed from behind the water tank. "Jake, now!" He pocketed the satellite phone without hanging up and dove toward the concealed tunnel. Elena had already disappeared into the narrow passage, her LED headlamp creating a bobbing circle of light ahead. Jake squeezed through the opening just as the acrid smell of gas began seeping into the cabin. The tunnel was barely wide enough for his shoulders, carved through the heartwood in a downward spiral that seemed to follow the tree's natural grain. His uncle's paranoia had apparently extended to emergency escape routes. Jake crawled desperately after Elena's light, splinters tearing at his jacket, his breathing coming in sharp gasps. Behind them, he could hear muffled sounds from the cabin, boots on wood, equipment being moved. How long before they discovered the tunnel entrance? Elena's light suddenly disappeared. Jake's panic spiked until he heard her voice ahead, drop down. "There's a vertical shaft." He emerged into a wider space and found himself looking down a narrow chimney that descended into blackness. Elena was already rappelling into the depths, using a rope their uncle had apparently left for this exact purpose. "Where does it lead?" Jake called softly. "Outside the perimeter, I hope." Her voice echoed strangely from below. "But we need to move fast. I can smell the gas from here." Jake grabbed the rope and began his descent, trying not to think about the flames that would soon consume the only real home he'd ever known. Above them, the ancient redwood held its secrets close, protecting the truth even as it prepared to burn. The emergency room's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Jake sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair, his left arm cradled in a sling. The doctor had confirmed what he already knew: dislocated shoulder, minor concussion, and enough scrapes and bruises to make him look like he'd gone 10 rounds with a grizzly bear. What the doctor couldn't explain was how he'd survived a 50-foot fall with only these relatively minor injuries. Elena paced the small examination room, her phone pressed to her ear as she spoke in rapid Spanish to someone on the other end. Her hiking boots squeaked against the linoleum with each anxious step. When she finally hung up, Jake could see the worry etched deep in her features. "My contact at the Forest Service says there's been unusual activity in the area for the past week," she said, pulling up a chair beside him. "Helicopter flights, vehicles with government plates, even some kind of ground-penetrating radar equipment." Jake winced as he shifted position. "They're mapping the entire grove system, aren't they? Looking for other trees like mine?" "It gets worse. The official story is that you were injured in a hiking accident. No mention of the men who attacked us, no investigation into the explosion. Elena's voice dropped to a whisper. Someone with serious pull is covering this up. The weight of the medallion around his neck felt heavier than ever. Jake had managed to keep it hidden from the medical staff, but he could feel its strange warmth against his chest, almost pulsing with an energy he didn't understand. The symbol etched into its surface, the same one from the vault, seemed to burn itself into his memory every time he closed his eyes. "We can't go back to the cabin," he said, stating the obvious. "Even if it survived the blast, they'll be watching it." Elena nodded grimly. "But we can't run forever either. These people, whoever they are, they're not going to give up. And now they know you have access to whatever your family's been protecting." A soft knock interrupted their conversation. Jake tensed, expecting another doctor or nurse, but instead, an elderly man in a rumpled suit stepped into the room. He had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and moved with the careful deliberation of someone carrying invisible weight. "Mr. Sullivan? I'm Dr. Marcus Webb. I believe we need to talk." Elena immediately positioned herself between the stranger and Jake. "Who are you? How did you know we were here?" Dr. Webb raised his hands peacefully. "I'm a friend, or rather I was a friend of your uncle's, Jake. We worked together for many years before his retirement." Jake studied the man's face, searching for any resemblance to the shadowy figures who had attacked them. Something about Dr. Webb felt different, less threatening, more genuinely concerned. "What kind of work?" "The kind that your family has been doing for over 2 centuries, the kind that got your uncle killed." Dr. Webb glanced around nervously before continuing. "I know you found the vault, I know you have the medallion, and I know that by now the consortium has marked you for elimination." The name sent a chill down Jake's spine. "The consortium? A secret organization that's been trying to claim what your family protects for generations. They have people embedded in government agencies, private corporations, academic institutions. They've been searching for the Grove for decades, but your ancestors were very good at keeping it hidden." Elena crossed her arms. "And why should we trust you?" Dr. Webb reached slowly into his jacket and withdrew a photograph. It showed a much younger version of himself, standing beside Jake's uncle in front of what looked like an archaeological dig site. Both men were smiling, their arms around each other's shoulders like old friends. "Because 25 years ago, your uncle and I discovered something that changed everything we thought we knew about human history. We found proof that the redwood groves aren't just trees, they're repositories, living libraries containing knowledge from a civilization that existed long before recorded history." Jake's mind raced. The strange energy he'd felt in the vault, the way the medallion seemed to respond to his touch, the advanced preservation techniques that had kept the documents intact for centuries. "You're talking about something ancient, something that predates everything we know." "The trees themselves are the key," Dr. Webb continued. "They can live for thousands of years and they remember. The knowledge stored in your grove is just one piece of a much larger puzzle. The consortium believes they can use this information to rewrite human civilization, to claim power beyond imagination." Elena stepped forward. "And you want to stop them?" "I want to protect what remains. Your uncle and I formed a network of guardians, families and individuals committed to keeping this knowledge safe. But we've been compromised. The consortium has been picking us off one by one." Jake felt the medallion pulse again, stronger this time. Whatever force had protected him during his fall from the tree, whatever ancient power flowed through his bloodline, it was connected to something far greater than he'd imagined. The responsibility his uncle had carried, the burden now falling to him, suddenly felt overwhelming. "So what do we do now?" Dr. Webb's expression hardened with determination. "We disappear, and then we fight back." The sound of approaching helicopters shattered the forest silence like thunder. Jake pressed himself against the inner wall of the redwood cabin, his heart hammering as the rhythmic thump-thump-thump grew louder overhead. Through the narrow window carved into the ancient wood, he could see searchlights sweeping the canopy, their harsh white beams slicing through the dawn mist. "They found us faster than I expected," Marcus whispered, moving away from the entrance with practiced stealth. The old man's face was grim in the pale light filtering through the organic walls. "The consortium has resources we can barely comprehend." Jake's fingers tightened around the leather satchel containing the documents they'd retrieved from the vault. 3 days of running through the California wilderness had taken its toll, but the weight of centuries-old secrets felt heavier than any physical exhaustion. The revelation that his family had been guardians of an ancient knowledge that could reshape human understanding of history seemed almost impossible to believe, until people started trying to kill him for it. "How many ways out of here?" Jake asked, scanning the interior of the cabin his uncle had carved from the fallen giant's heartwood. Even now, pursued by forces that seemed to have unlimited reach, he marveled at the craftsmanship. Thomas Sullivan had spent decades creating this sanctuary, hollowing out chambers and passages with the devotion of a monk, illuminating manuscripts. "2," Marcus replied, pointing toward a section of wall that looked identical to every other surface. "The main entrance we came through, and an emergency exit that leads to the root system. But if they're using thermal imaging..." The wall beside them exploded inward with a deafening crack. Splinters of ancient wood flew like shrapnel as dark-clad figures rappelled through the breach, automatic weapons trained on the cabin's interior. Jake dove behind a carved wooden table, pulling Marcus with him as gunfire erupted. "Sullivan," the voice cut through the chaos with military precision. "You have something that belongs to our organization. Return it, and your death will be quick." Jake exchanged a glance with Marcus, who shook his head grimly. They both knew surrender meant death regardless. The documents in Jake's satchel detailed not just the location of artifacts that predated known civilization, but the systematic cover-up orchestrated by the consortium for over a century. Museum directors, university researchers, government officials, all part of a web designed to suppress discoveries that challenged accepted historical narratives. "The emergency exit," Marcus hissed, pointing toward the far wall. "Can you reach it?" Before Jake could respond, more soldiers poured through the breach. The cabin that had seemed spacious moments before now felt like a trap. Jake clutched the satchel and sprinted across the open space, bullets chewing up the wooden floor behind him. His shoulder slammed into the hidden panel Marcus had indicated, and it gave way, revealing a narrow tunnel that descended into darkness. He tumbled forward, landing hard on packed earth. Behind him, he could hear Marcus shouting, a diversion buying him precious seconds. Jake crawled through the tunnel, the roots of the fallen redwood creating a natural ceiling overhead. The passage seemed to go on forever, sloping downward into the earth beneath the massive tree. The tunnel ended abruptly at what appeared to be a solid wall of dirt and roots. Panic flared in Jake's chest until his fumbling hands found a concealed lever. The barrier swung inward, revealing another chamber he hadn't known existed. Emergency lighting flickered on automatically, illuminating walls lined with more artifacts than the vault upstairs had contained. Jake stared in amazement at stone tablets covered in symbols that seemed to shift and flow in the artificial light. Metallic objects of unknown purpose gleamed from carefully constructed niches. But what drew his attention was a modern communication setup tucked into one corner, radio equipment that hummed with quiet power. He moved toward the radio, then stopped. On the desk beside it lay an envelope with his name written in his uncle's distinctive handwriting. With trembling fingers, Jake tore it open. "If you're reading this, the worst has happened, and they've found the cabin. But this chamber has remained hidden for 40 years, and it can remain hidden longer. The choice is yours, Jake. You can use the radio to contact the people I've listed below, journalists, scientists, others who've been working to expose the truth. Or you can wait here until it's safe to run again. But know this, once you transmit those documents, there will be no going back. The consortium will never stop hunting you." The sound of gunfire above had ceased. Jake strained to listen for any sign of Marcus, but heard only his own ragged breathing. The weight of decision pressed down on him like the earth overhead. He could hide here indefinitely, keep the secrets buried as his family had done for generations, or he could honor the sacrifice Marcus had just made and risk everything to bring the truth into the light. Jake powered up the radio and began transmitting. The sound of approaching vehicles cut through the forest silence like a blade. Jake pressed himself against the rough bark of a towering redwood, his heart hammering as headlights swept through the trees below. 3 black SUVs moved in perfect formation along the access road, their engines purring with predatory efficiency. "They found us faster than I expected," Elena whispered from behind an adjacent tree, her voice barely audible above the wind rustling through the canopy. Jake counted at least 12 figures emerging from the vehicles, their movements coordinated and professional. These weren't the same mercenaries from the cabin. This was a different team entirely. The realization sent ice through his veins. How many people were hunting them? "The coordinates Marcus gave us," Jake said, clutching the leather journal against his chest. "How far?" Elena consulted her phone's GPS, the screen's glow carefully shielded by her jacket. 2 miles northeast. There's supposed to be a ranger station, but it was abandoned in the 70s. A flashlight beam swept dangerously close to their position. Jake held his breath, pressing deeper into the shadows. The journal contained everything: his uncle's decades of research, the locations of other guardians, and most crucially, the truth about what they'd been protecting. If these people got their hands on it, generations of sacrifice would be for nothing. "Move," Elena breathed. They crept through the underbrush, every step calculated to avoid the dry branches and fallen leaves that could betray their position. Behind them, voices carried on the night air, clipped professional communications that spoke of military training. Jake caught fragments: perimeter established, Nobelium visual contact, expanding search grid. The forest floor rose steadily as they climbed deeper into the hills. Jake's legs burned from the constant upward trek, but adrenaline pushed him forward. Elena moved like a ghost beside him, her experience evident in every silent footfall. He wondered again about her background, about the skills that seemed too polished for a simple academic. "There," she said, pointing ahead. Through the trees, Jake could make out the skeletal remains of a fire tower, its metal framework reaching toward the star-filled sky like the bones of some ancient giant. At its base, barely visible in the darkness, sat a small building with boarded windows and a sagging roof. They approached cautiously. The ranger station had clearly been abandoned for decades, but something about it felt wrong. Too clean, too intact for a building left to the elements for nearly 50 years. Elena tried the door handle. Locked. Jake was about to suggest they find another way in when she produced a small set of picks from her jacket pocket. "Archaeology requires diverse skills," she said with a slight smile, already working on the lock. The door swung open with barely a whisper. Inside, their flashlights revealed a space that definitely wasn't abandoned. Modern equipment lined the walls: communications gear, computers, and detailed topographical maps marked with red pins, dozens of red pins. "Jesus," Jake muttered, studying the maps. Each pin marked a location where guardian families had lived for generations: his uncle's property, the settlement in Oregon where the Blackwood family had maintained their watch, sites across California, Washington, even into Canada. "They've been tracking all of you," Elena said, her voice tight with understanding. "For how long?" Jake found a file cabinet and pulled it open. Inside were manila folders, each labeled with a family name he recognized from his uncle's journal. His own surname was there, thick with documentation going back decades. Photos of his father, his uncle, even himself as a child visiting the cabin. "My God," he whispered, pulling out surveillance photos taken just days ago. Pictures of him entering the fallen redwood, emerging with the journal, meeting Elena at the diner. A new sound reached them from outside, the rhythmic thrum of helicopter rotors growing steadily louder. "We need to go," Elena said urgently. "Now." But Jake was transfixed by what he'd found at the bottom of his family's file. A single sheet of paper with an official letterhead, Meridian Corporation. The same company Marcus had mentioned, the one that had been buying up land around Guardian sites. The document was a termination order, Not for employment, for lives. "Jake!" Elena grabbed his arm. "They're here!" The helicopter's spotlight blazed through the windows, turning night into harsh day. Shouts erupted from multiple directions as the ground team converged on their position. Jake stuffed the termination order into his jacket alongside the journal. Whatever Meridian Corporation was really after, whatever ancient secret his family had died to protect, it was worth killing for on an industrial scale. They burst through the back door as the front windows exploded inward. Armed figures in tactical gear poured into the station, their weapons sweeping the space they'd just vacated. The forest swallowed them as they ran, but Jake knew their sanctuary was temporary. These people had resources, organization, and a reach that spanned generations. They were no longer just being hunted. They were at war. The helicopter's rotors thundered overhead as Jake pressed himself deeper into the hollow beneath the massive redwood's root system. Sarah's breathing was shallow beside him, her shoulder wound still seeping blood through the makeshift bandage. The ancient journal clutched in his hands felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, the culmination of everything his family had died protecting. "They're circling back," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible over the mechanical whine above them. "We can't stay here much longer." Jake peered through the tangle of roots and ferns at the forest beyond. 3 black SUVs had positioned themselves at strategic points around the grove, their occupants spreading out in a systematic search pattern. The consortium had found them faster than he'd anticipated, but then again, they'd had centuries to perfect their methods. His phone buzzed against his chest. A text from Marcus, safe house compromised. "They have Elena, Cathedral Street. 1 hour?" The words hit him like a physical blow. Elena, the elderly woman who'd helped them decode the journal's cryptic passages, was now in their hands. Another innocent dragged into a war that had been raging since before America was even a nation. "We have to move," Jake said, showing Sarah the message. "They have Elena." Sarah's face went pale. "It's a trap. They're using her as bait." "I know." Jake carefully wrapped the journal in the waterproof cloth and secured it inside his jacket. "But we can't leave her. And besides, running isn't working anymore. They'll keep hunting us until they get what they want. Or until we're dead. That, too." A branch snapped somewhere to their left. Jake caught a glimpse of tactical gear moving through the undergrowth, black-clad figures with military precision advancing on their position. He counted at least 4, probably more behind the tree line. Sarah gripped his arm. "The old logging road. It runs parallel to the creek about 200 yards north. If we can reach it." "That's a lot of open ground." Jake studied the terrain between their hiding spot and the distant road. "But staying here means getting cornered." The helicopter made another pass, its searchlight cutting through the canopy like a laser. For a moment, the beam illuminated the ground just feet from their hiding spot, and Jake held his breath until it moved on. "On my signal," he whispered, "stay low and follow the creek bed." They burst from cover in a desperate sprint, crashing through the underbrush as shouts erupted behind them. Jake's boots splashed through the shallow water while branches whipped at his face. The journal bounced against his ribs with each pounding step. A rifle cracked in the distance, and bark exploded from a tree inches from Sarah's head. She stumbled but kept running, her injured arm pressed tight against her side. The helicopter swung around, its spotlight tracking their movement like a predatory eye. The logging road appeared ahead, a narrow dirt track carved between towering trees. Jake's lungs burned as they scrambled up the muddy embankment, but there was no time to rest. An engine roared to life somewhere behind them, growing closer by the second. "There!" Sarah pointed to an old ranger station about a quarter-mile up the road. "We can call for backup." But as they ran toward the weathered building, Jake noticed something that made his blood freeze. Fresh tire tracks led directly to the station, and the front door hung open like a mouth. No ranger would leave their post unsecured. "It's another trap," he panted, pulling Sarah to a stop. "They're herding us." The engine noise grew louder, accompanied by the crunch of tires on gravel. Jake spun around to see headlights cutting through the forest gloom, still distant but closing fast. The helicopter had moved off to the east, probably coordinating with ground units to box them in completely. His mind raced through their dwindling options. The journal contained evidence that could expose the consortium's centuries of manipulation and murder, but only if they lived long enough to share it. Elena's capture had forced their hand. They couldn't run anymore, couldn't hide. It was time to take the fight directly to their enemies. "The cathedral," Jake said suddenly. "It's not just a meeting place. It's where they store everything. Records, artifacts, proof of what they've been doing. If we can get inside, with Elena as their insurance policy." Sarah's voice was grim but determined. "They'll want to trade. Her life for the journal. Then we make the trade. But not the way they expect." Jake pulled out his phone and scrolled through the emergency contacts Marcus had given him weeks ago. Names and numbers he'd hoped never to use, but desperate times demanded desperate measures. The consortium had resources and history on their side, but they weren't the only ones with secrets. The headlights were closer now, maybe half a mile away. Time was running out, but Jake allowed himself a grim smile as the first contact answered his call. The Sullivans had been guardians for generations, but they'd never been guardians alone. A real war was about to begin. The helicopter's rotors cut through the dawn air as Jake gripped the safety harness, watching the dense canopy of the Redwood National Forest spread out below like an endless green carpet. Sarah sat beside him, her laptop balanced precariously on her knees as she made final adjustments to their plan. "There," she said, pointing to a cluster of ancient giants. "That's where Marcus should be setting up the diversion." Jake's stomach churned, though whether from the helicopter's movement or the magnitude of what they were about to attempt, he couldn't say. In 6 hours, the keepers would converge on his uncle's property for what they believed would be the final retrieval of the Threshold archive. They had no idea that Jake and his allies had spent the last 3 days orchestrating an elaborate deception. The pilot's voice crackled through their headsets. "Drop zone approaching." "You sure about this landing spot?" Jake studied the small clearing Marcus had identified, a gap in the forest canopy barely large enough for the helicopter. "That's it. Get us down fast and get out. If anyone asks, you never saw us." The descent felt like controlled falling. Ancient redwoods towered around them as they touched down, their massive trunks disappearing into the misty heights above. The moment Jake's feet hit solid ground, he was moving, shouldering his pack and heading toward the tree line. "Remember," Sarah called out as the helicopter lifted away, "we have exactly 47 minutes before the Keeper's advance team reaches the perimeter." They moved through the forest with practiced stealth, following game trails that wound between the massive root systems. Jake had studied these paths during his weeks hiding in the redwood cabin, but everything looked different in the grey pre-dawn light. The ancient trees seemed to press closer, their shadows deeper and more ominous. His radio crackled softly. "Phoenix, this is Eagle." Marcus's codename felt ridiculous, but secure communications were no joke with the Keepers closing in. "Charges are set. The old mining equipment will make quite a show." "Copy that," Jake whispered back. "Raven, status report." Elena's voice came through clearly. "FBI units are in position. The moment your people make their move, we'll have them boxed in. Just make sure you're clear of the blast radius." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Let the Keepers think they'd won. Allow them to reach what they believed was the vault's location, actually an abandoned mining site Marcus had rigged with explosives and fake archaeological evidence. While they were distracted by their apparent victory, Jake would be 3 miles away, accessing the real Threshold archive hidden beneath the fallen redwood. But first, he had to survive the next hour. The forest grew denser as they approached the cabin's location. Jake's heart hammered against his ribs when he spotted the familiar bulk of the massive fallen tree. It looked exactly as he'd left it, peaceful, unremarkable, giving no hint of the technological marvel carved into its heartwood. "There," he breathed, pointing toward the concealed entrance. Sarah's eyes widened as they approached. "Jake, this is incredible. How long did it take your uncle to—" A branch snapped behind them. Jake spun, his hand moving instinctively to the pistol Marcus had insisted he carry. Through the morning mist, he could make out shapes moving between the trees. Too many shapes. The keepers had arrived early. "Run," he hissed, grabbing Sarah's hand. They crashed through the undergrowth as shouts erupted behind them. Jake's mind raced through the options. The cabin's entrance was 30 yards away, but they'd never make it without being seen. The keepers had somehow anticipated their plan. A gunshot cracked through the air, bark exploding from a tree inches from Jake's head. He yanked Sarah sideways, using a massive root system for cover. "Phoenix! Phoenix!" Marcus's voice burst through the radio. They split their forces. Half went for the mining site, but at least 12 are converging on your location. You've got maybe 60 seconds before they surround you. Sarah's face had gone pale, but her voice remained steady. "The archive. We can't let them get it." Jake peered around the root cluster. Armed figures in tactical gear were spreading out in a wide semicircle, moving with military precision. At their center, he recognized the cold features of Director Morrison, the man who'd orchestrated his uncle's death and hunted him across 3 states. Morrison raised a megaphone. "Mr. Sullivan, you've led us quite a chase, but it ends here. Come out now and Dr. Chen won't be harmed." Jake's finger moved to his radio transmit button. Eagle, implement Prometheus. Negative, Phoenix. "You're too close to— Do it now." The explosion from the mining site lit up the forest like a miniature sun. Even 3 miles away, the ground shook beneath their feet. As the keepers instinctively turned toward the blast, Jake made his move. He and Sarah sprinted for the cabin entrance, Morrison's angry shouts echoing behind them as the ancient redwood swallowed them into its hidden sanctuary. The ancient symbols on the vault's inner chamber seemed to pulse with their own light as Jake traced his finger along the carved lines. Sarah stood beside him, her laptop balanced precariously on a stack of weathered journals, frantically cross-referencing the markings with historical databases. The hidden room beneath the redwood cabin felt smaller now, weighted with the magnitude of what they'd uncovered. "These aren't just random carvings," Sarah whispered, her voice tight with excitement and fear. "They're coordinates, multiple locations across the Pacific Northwest, all connected by ley lines, electromagnetic pathways that indigenous peoples considered sacred." Jake pulled back from the wall, dust coating his fingertips. "Uncle Marcus left us breadcrumbs. He knew someone would come looking, knew we'd need to understand the full scope of what our family's been protecting." A low rumble echoed through the chamber, and both of them froze. It wasn't the settling of ancient wood or the distant sound of wind through the redwood grove. This was mechanical, deliberate. "Vehicles," Jake breathed, moving toward the concealed entrance. "Multiple engines." Sarah's fingers flew across her keyboard, downloading everything she could access from the vault's digital archives. "I need 5 more minutes to—" "We don't have 5 minutes." Jake was already gathering the most critical documents, stuffing them into the waterproof bag they'd brought. "Take only what we absolutely need." The rumble grew louder, closer. Through the narrow ventilation shaft that Uncle Marcus had cleverly disguised as a natural gap in the fallen trunk, Jake caught the flicker of headlights cutting through the forest darkness. "The back exit," he said, remembering the emergency tunnel his uncle had shown him in the journal's hand-drawn schematics. "There's a passage that leads to the creek bed." Sarah slammed her laptop shut and grabbed a leather-bound ledger that looked older than the cabin itself. "This contains names, dates, locations. If something happens to us—" "Nothing's going to happen." But Jake's voice carried more conviction than he felt. The people hunting them had already proven they'd kill for these secrets. Marcus Sullivan had died protecting them, and now Jake understood why. The symbols on the walls told a story that stretched back centuries, involving not just his family but a network of guardians spread across multiple bloodlines. They weren't protecting treasure or historical artifacts. They were safeguarding locations where the Earth's natural energy concentrated in ways that could be catastrophically dangerous if exploited. Jake pressed his hand against what appeared to be solid wood, and a section of the chamber wall swung inward on hidden hinges. The tunnel beyond was narrow, carved from the living earth between massive root systems that formed natural supports. "This way," he whispered, pulling out his flashlight and switching it to its dimmest setting. They crawled through the tunnel single file, Sarah clutching the ledger against her chest. Behind them, Jake could hear muffled voices and the sound of equipment being moved. Their pursuers had found the main entrance to the cabin. The tunnel seemed to stretch forever, though Jake's watch told him they'd only been crawling for 10 minutes. His shoulders ached from hunching forward, and twice he had to stop to help Sarah navigate particularly tight passages. Then they heard it, footsteps directly overhead, heavy boots moving with purpose across the cabin floor above. "They're inside," Sarah breathed against his ear. Jake nodded grimly and kept moving. The tunnel began to angle downward, following the natural slope toward the creek that ran behind the property. Uncle Marcus had been brilliant in his planning, using the landscape's own features to create an escape route that would be nearly impossible to detect. A sudden crash echoed through the tunnel, the sound of furniture being overturned, walls being torn apart. Their hunters weren't bothering with subtlety now. The tunnel ended at a steel grate covered by decades of moss and debris. Jake carefully cleared away the camouflage and tested the mechanism. The grate swung open smoothly, well-maintained, despite its hidden location. They emerged beside the creek, hidden by overhanging ferns and the drooping branches of an enormous cedar. The sound of running water masked their quiet breathing as Jake oriented himself. They were nearly a quarter-mile from the cabin, on the opposite side of Uncle Marcus's property. "My truck's too far," Jake whispered, studying the terrain. "They'll have people watching the main road anyway." Sarah pointed downstream. "There's an old logging road about 2 miles that way. I saw it on the satellite maps when I was researching the property boundaries." Jake nodded and began moving along the creek bank, staying low and keeping to the shadows. Behind them, flashlight beams were beginning to sweep through the forest. It wouldn't take long for their pursuers to realize they'd escaped. As they crept through the darkness, Jake clutched the waterproof bag containing generations of Sullivan family secrets. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him like the massive redwood under which those secrets had been hidden. Whatever his ancestors had sworn to protect, people were still willing to kill for it. And now he and Sarah were the only ones standing between ancient powers and those who would exploit them. The helicopter's rotor wash sent pine needles swirling as Jake pressed himself deeper into the hollow beneath the fallen giant. His breathing came in short, controlled bursts as he listened to boots hitting the forest floor 30 yards away. Through the gap in the redwood's bark, he counted 4 figures in tactical gear spreading out in a search pattern. Dr. Chen's voice crackled through his earpiece. "Jake, I've got eyes on your position from the ridge. They're moving in a standard sweep formation. You've got maybe 2 minutes before they reach your location." Jake's fingers tightened around the waterproof case, containing the final piece of evidence, photographs from the vault showing the location of the main repository, along with his great-grandfather's journal detailing the true scope of what their family had been protecting. Generations of Sullivans had died to keep this secret safe, and now it all came down to him. "Marcus is moving toward the cabin entrance," Chen continued. "He's got something in his hand. Looks like a detonator." Jake's blood ran cold. The cabin wasn't just his inheritance. It was a living piece of history, a testament to his family's dedication. More importantly, it still contained artifacts that could never be replaced if Marcus decided to eliminate all evidence. A branch snapped 15 feet to his left. Jake slowly turned his head and saw the barrel of an assault rifle poking through the undergrowth. The searcher was methodical, checking every possible hiding spot with professional precision. Jake reached into his jacket and felt the weight of his uncle's revolver, but he knew a firefight would only get him killed. Instead, he carefully removed a fist-sized rock from beside his leg. As the rifle barrel swept closer, Jake hurled the stone in a high arc toward a cluster of dead branches 40 feet away. The crash of the rock striking the branches drew immediate attention. The searcher pivoted and moved toward the sound, speaking quietly into his radio. Movement in Sector 3, converging on position. Jake seized the moment, slipping out of his hiding spot and moving in a low crouch toward the massive root system at the tree's base. The ancient redwood's root ball created a maze of natural barriers, and Jake used them to mask his movement as he circled back toward the cabin. Chen's voice was urgent now. "Jake, Marcus just entered the cabin. Whatever he's planning, it's happening now." Jake broke into a run, abandoning stealth for speed. The cabin's concealed entrance was 50 yards ahead, and he could see light spilling from the opening. As he approached, he heard Marcus's voice from inside, speaking to someone on a satellite phone. "The site is compromised. Too many people know about it now. We're implementing the scorched earth protocol." Jake reached the entrance and peered inside. Marcus stood in the main chamber, a device with blinking red lights in his hands. Jake recognized it immediately, a thermite charge designed to burn hot enough to melt metal and incinerate everything in the vault. "You're too late, Sullivan," Marcus said without turning around. "Your family's little secret ends tonight." "You don't understand what you're destroying," Jake said, stepping into the chamber with his hands visible. "This isn't just about my family. The knowledge in that vault could change everything we know about pre-Columbian history." Marcus finally turned, his face wearing a cold smile. "That's exactly why it has to be destroyed. Some secrets are too dangerous to exist." "Dangerous to who? To your organization? To the people who've been covering this up for decades?" "You think this is about money or power?" Marcus laughed harshly. "This is about preventing chaos. Do you have any idea what would happen if the world learned that everything we thought we knew about ancient civilizations was wrong? The implications would destabilize governments, religions, entire worldviews." Jake took a careful step closer. "So you murder people to maintain a lie?" "We preserve order. Your uncle understood that eventually. He agreed to keep the secret buried, but then he got sentimental in his old age and left you that letter." Through his earpiece, Jake heard Chen's whispered warning, "Two hostiles approaching the entrance behind you." Jake made his choice. Instead of reaching for his weapon, he lunged forward and grabbed the thermite device from Marcus's hands. The two men crashed into the wooden wall, fighting for control of the device as boots thundered into the chamber behind them. "Don't shoot!" Marcus yelled to his men. "The device could detonate." Jake managed to tear the thermite charge free and hurled it toward the entrance, where it clattered harmlessly against the wall. But Marcus recovered quickly, drawing his sidearm and pointing it directly at Jake's chest. "It doesn't matter," Marcus said, breathing hard. "We have other ways to clean up loose ends." The sound of Chen's rifle echoed from outside, followed by shouts of alarm from Marcus's remaining men. In that moment of distraction, Jake dove toward the vault, knowing that whatever happened next, the truth his family had protected for generations would finally see the light of day. The ancient chamber trembled as Marcus Blackwood's body hit the stone floor, his lifeless eyes staring at the ceiling where centuries of secrets had been carved. Jake's hands shook as he lowered the smoking pistol, the weight of what he'd done settling over him like a shroud. The man who had orchestrated his uncle's death, who had hunted him across the country, who had tried to destroy everything Henry Sullivan had died protecting, was finally gone. Sarah pressed herself against Jake's side, her breathing ragged. "Is it over?" Jake looked around the chamber, taking in the scattered papers, the broken artifacts, the blood pooling beneath Blackwood's still form. The consortium's leader was dead, but Jake knew that organizations like this one didn't simply disappear with the death of a single man, no matter how powerful. "For now," he said quietly, holstering the gun. Elena Martinez stepped carefully around the debris, her face pale but determined. "We need to document everything before anyone else arrives. This chamber, these artifacts, they're proof of a history that's been deliberately buried for centuries." Jake nodded, his mind still reeling from the revelations that had spilled from Blackwood's lips in those final moments. The consortium hadn't just been guarding secrets, they had been actively suppressing them, rewriting history to maintain control over humanity's understanding of its own past. The Sullivan family had been the last line of defense against a conspiracy that stretched back to the founding of America itself. Moving deeper into the chamber, Jake found himself drawn to a series of stone tablets arranged along the far wall. The symbols carved into their surfaces seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, and as he approached, he felt the same strange resonance he'd experienced in his uncle's hidden vault. "These aren't just historical artifacts," he murmured, running his fingers along the intricate carvings. "They're instructions, a guide to something much bigger than we imagined." Sarah joined him, her archaeological training evident as she examined the tablets. "The craftsmanship is extraordinary. These symbols, they're similar to what we found in your uncle's collection, but far more complex. It's like they're part of a larger sequence." As Jake studied the carvings, pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. His uncle's cryptic notes, the strange dreams that had plagued him since inheriting the property, the way certain locations seemed to call to him, it all pointed to something his family had been preparing for across generations. Elena's voice echoed from across the chamber. "You need to see this." They found her standing before a massive stone door, its surface covered in the same symbolic language they'd been deciphering. But unlike the other artifacts in the chamber, this door seemed alive somehow, thrumming with barely contained energy. "It's been sealed for centuries," Elena explained, pointing to the elaborate locking mechanism. "But according to these inscriptions, it can only be opened by someone carrying the bloodline of the original guardians." Jake felt the medallion his uncle had left him growing warm against his chest. Without fully understanding why, he reached for it, holding it up to the door's surface. The symbols began to glow with a soft, golden light, and the massive stone began to shift. "Jake, wait!" Sarah grabbed his arm. "We don't know what's behind there." But it was too late. The door was already opening, revealing not another chamber but a passage that seemed to extend far deeper into the earth than should have been possible. A warm breeze emanated from within, carrying with it the scent of something ancient and alive. Jake stepped forward, compelled by forces he couldn't name. "This is what my family has been protecting. Not just knowledge or artifacts, but access to something that could change everything we think we know about human history." As they descended into the passage, Jake felt the weight of his inheritance settling around him like a mantle. He was no longer just Henry Sullivan's nephew who had stumbled into a family secret. He was the latest in a line of guardians, stretching back through centuries, entrusted with protecting knowledge that could either enlighten humanity or destroy it. The passage opened into a vast underground space, its walls lined with crystalline formations that cast an ethereal glow throughout the cavern. But it wasn't the beauty of the place that took Jake's breath away. It was the realization that they were standing at the threshold of something that would redefine humanity's place in the universe. Sarah's hand found his, squeezing tight. "Whatever happens next, we face it together." Jake nodded, looking back one last time at the chamber where Blackwood's body lay cooling. The immediate threat was over, but their real journey was just beginning. His uncle's legacy wasn't just about guarding secrets. It was about knowing when the time had come to reveal them. Taking a deep breath, Jake stepped forward into the unknown, carrying with him the hopes and fears of all the guardians who had come before, ready to face whatever truths lay waiting in the depths of the earth.